Hi, thank you so much for coming back and visiting our Morgan James book launch. And my name is Jim Howard. I'm the publisher of Morgan James Publishing, and I am so excited today to introduce you to our amazing author, Christie Love. And Christie's the author of God of the Gaps, Finding Faith in the In-Between Spaces of Our Journey. Christie, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Oh, I'm excited as well. As we've talked about this book, and we're just sharing before we started this conversation that it just seemed like not that long ago we were just talking about the book and potentially working together. And now we have a book, and it is an amazing book, and I'm really excited to introduce people to that. And the title of the book really talks about what the book is. I mean, the God of the gaps and this idea of gaps. So I think I want to start there. Can you explain the concept of gaps and what that means, what you're talking about in the book?
Yeah, absolutely. So by definition, a gap is an in-between space, right? The space between two objects. And for me, about a decade ago, I entered into a season of my life that just felt like I was between two objects. It felt like kind of the rock and the hard place. It felt like I was between a problem and a solution that just wasn't here yet. And it was in that space for me where I lingered for a long time. And in some respects, I'm still there, right? Like, gaps change over time, but there's different elements that you discover. And it was really kind of in this in-between place, this waiting place for me, that I just really started to wrestle with some really tough faith questions. I grew up in the church. I've always been, a church girl quintessentially. And yet it was in that space where I found myself kind of between two things, between, questions and answers, between, understanding and not knowing why things were happening, that I started to ask questions I'd never really felt like I had permission to ask God before. It started with a lot of, this isn't fair. I don't deserve this. Why is this having to happen? And I think we've probably all been there with God, if we're honest, in some places. But it was just really kind of leaning into that space and discovering a faith and a relationship with God that was completely stripped of all of the preconceptions, any of those things that I felt like I had to do or go through the motions. I really kind of felt freedom from a lot of those things in that space and discovered that, man, in between my places, I really fell in love with his heart in a whole new way. And that was really my heart for this book. Was it's not so much my story of my gap as it is looking at, what are common things that we experience in the gap? What are things that all of us can relate to? And I think one of the greatest lessons that we learn in this book is really talking about how gaps are not scorecards. They're not meant to be compared. Like, my gap is my gap and your gap is your gap. And the journeys themselves don't need to be compared and contrasted, but the experiences and the emotions that we have in those gaps, they are so incredibly similar often that they're connecting points for us as individuals to build relationship and build authenticity, which we don't always do very well. But there are also connecting points between our heart and God's heart. And so that's really kind of the concept behind God of the Gaps, discovering him and discovering relationships with other people based around those similar struggles of faith.
Wow. Wow. And that's where what hit me when I was reading your book and talking with you even early on is that, that's where we can find a really true deep connection.
Yeah.
Is, let's face it, it's easy to understand who God is when God's being exactly who we expect him to be, or the picture that we create of God to be, and everything's going right, everything's going well. But it's in those times, and we all have them. Being a Christian doesn't mean you live a worry-free, trouble-free life. It just means now you've got an anchor to hold on to, and those times are going to come. But it's in those times, if we honestly ask those questions and allow ourselves to investigate and form that deeper relationship with him, that we find real true strength in who he honestly is, and that he is exactly who he said he would be. And I think that's so powerful. So thank you for digging into this. And so who would you say this book is written primarily for?
Yeah, so I think this is one of my favorite aspects of this book, and one of my favorite questions that I get asked often, because so many times I think you see a title like God of the Gaps, and it's like, oh, got to be a believer to read that book, or this is a book on spiritual disciplines, and that is so not the case, because I'm a big believer that sometimes the best place that we meet God is at rock bottom. Sometimes the best place that we meet God is in the places where we least expect to find him, and it's oftentimes in those places of struggle. It's in those in between places. It's in the gap that a lot of times we are just, our heart's in a different condition. Our ears are tuned to different things. Our eyes are seeing things a little bit differently. And so many times it is actually in the gap that people can discover faith for the very first time. And so I like to tell people that I feel like there's something in this book for everybody. I feel like there is something in this book. If you grew up in the church, it's going to challenge you, and it's going to challenge some routines. It's going to challenge some habits. It's going to challenge you to maybe get a little bit deeper and a little bit more honest in your relationship with God. But it's also going to connect with you, I think, if you are someone who's always been really skeptical of faith, or you've always had a lot of questions, because we talk a lot about questions in the book. And I do life and leadership in my own personal ministry as a pastor. A lot of the people that I'm blessed to get to do life with are actually people who are coming from a posture of, I don't know if I believe in this. I'm not so sure what I think about this. And so I always try to kind of incorporate that voice as well in that conversation as well. So no matter where you are on the faith spectrum, my hope and my prayer is that this book's going to challenge your perspective in some way. This book is for everybody, because struggle is a fact of everyone's life. Like you said, Jim, scripture tells us when troubles come, not if troubles come. And so we're all going to have them. And, I say struggle is kind of like the great equalizer. I mean, it does not pick and choose with gender identity. It doesn't pick and choose with our income bracket. It doesn't pick and choose with our political affiliations. Like, no matter who you are, there's going to be a struggle that you encounter in your life at some point. And so I really believe that there's something that God can speak to everybody's heart when they're willing to dig into the space of the gap.
I love that. I love that. And you talked about it really in the first question. And even I heard some of this come through that second question there as well. But at the end of the book specifically, you talk about how to connect with others who are traveling through gaps in their life. And as we've said today, everybody's going to have that time, no matter who you are or where you are. Can you talk a little bit about how the book is designed to build community and to strengthen those connections?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times you pick up a book, right? You read it and then it goes back on your shelf. It was kind of like a one-time experience that you had. Or if you're like me, you collect all of the one-time experiences and then you go back and revisit the highlights and the underlying portions sometimes. But for me, one of the things that was really important when I was writing this was I didn't just want it to be something that you engaged with once and then you set it down. I wanted this to really be a catalyst for conversation, and I wanted it to be a catalyst for community. I really feel like in our modern day culture, especially our modern day church culture, we have really kind of adopted this mentality that, we go through the motions, we keep it surface level, we don't really let the mask down too often, hey, Christie, how are you doing? And my reaction is to say, oh, I'm great, even if I'm not great. And so I wanted this to be a place that really challenged us to get real and to be real, and learn how to have hard conversations with people. Again, not just hard conversations between our heart and God's heart. And so there's a lot of different aspects that we've tried to build into this book. We are doing book clubs like this summer when the book launches at the end of April. We're kind of throwing a challenge out. Can we do 100 virtual book clubs online? And we've got some discussion guides to go with those. We've got some trainings for pastors on how to lead people and love people as they go through gaps a little bit better, but also as a faith leader, how do you lead in your own gap, right? Because sometimes I think there's a lot of pressure on faith leaders that I have to have it all together and people need to see me have it all together. But we go through struggles too. And what does that look like? And how do we do that? So we've got some of those kind of experiences built in. You can start a gap group in your community, which is kind of like that, maybe starts as a book club, but then just keeps going, and you guys meet and you do life together, and you kind of create a safe space for yourself to process some big emotions. We've got online communities too. We've got a Gap Travelers Facebook group that people can join. And it's just someplace where we post thoughts and quotes and maybe links to other really great resources. I pop in there and do a video once a week, and just some things that challenge people. We've got a Spotify playlist of just music that I think really just speaks into the Gap in a very special way. And so, we'll play different songs and share different songs and resources and places like that as well. So there's just a lot of different components that we've tried to put in place that really help people to connect with one another, learn to be honest about their own struggles. We end the book with a challenge that says, my Gap story. Like, what is your story? How can you name that story? How can you share that and steward the experiences that you've had? Because you never know how your willingness to share your story and what you've been through in the Gap, how that can impact somebody else and challenge them, and maybe really give them encouragement that they need at a time that they're just praying that somebody else maybe gets it or understands. And so at our website, we built a blog there where we're going to be sharing some of those Gap stories. It's just a place that people can go and realize, man, I'm not alone. There's other people who've been through this. There's other people who've made it through this, and I'm going to draw off some of their strength and some of their hope.
That's so beautiful, because we're told there's nothing new under the sun. And that means that we think we're alone in our journey because we can't imagine anyone else walking a similar struggle. But in reality, we're not. There are others just like us who are struggling with similar things, even the exact things. And if we can share that story, I'm a huge proponent of being able to leverage our story to help other people, because that's all we have unique to us is our story. And our story is a great way to show victory. It's a great way to show overcoming. It's a great way to show strength and love when you reach out and align yourself with other people. And I think this book, God of the Gaps, as Christie said, it's for leaders, it's for spiritual leaders, it's for churches, it's for people who want to do small groups, but I also think it's 100% for the individual. We all have our gaps, we all have our stories, and we're called to share those stories and share our journeys with other people who are on those same similar paths. And I would encourage everyone watching this today, listening to this, to get a copy of God of the Gaps, figure out and find Christie where she's at, and start leveraging this message and the information that Christie provides, because it's powerful. It's so well written and put together. So Christie, if someone is watching this right now, or maybe they have a copy of the book at this point, but they're wanting to connect deeper, what's the best way for people to get connected with you?
Yeah, the best place that I would suggest that people go to get connected is just our website, which is godofthegaps.org. And on there, you're going to find all of those different components. So there's information about the book. There's links to get it ordered and pre-ordered. There's going to be links as we get closer to release to download discussion guides and sign up to join a Gap group. And all of those different things are all built into that space. And then at the bottom in the footer, there's all of my social media links as well. So you can connect with me there on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of those great places. We've also got a newsletter that's put together there so that you can sign up just to get regular updates on other things that we're going to be doing going forward.
Outstanding. So I encourage all of you, get a copy of God of the Gaps, read it now. You can get a copy anywhere books are sold, online or your favorite bookstore, and connect with Christie either on our website, godofthegaps.org, or anywhere on social media as well. So I hope that you guys reach out and connect. Christie, thank you again for taking the time to talk with us. And more importantly, thank you for digging in and writing this book. Writing a book is never easy, but when you have a book and a message that is designed to really help people in the hard spots, it's well worth it. And you've done that. So thank you for taking the time and sharing your message with people.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm excited to see what happens with it.
Awesome. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you on our next one.